my friends. Welcome to this week's podcast. This week, I have Matt Venuti, who's a Hang player and an amazing musician who I've actually been following for quite a long time, particularly because I find his playing style interesting because it's not, to me, isn't as drum-based and is more melodic and song-like than some of the sort of drum-based players that are in the world of handpan and Hang. So I'm excited to have him tell us a little bit about himself and his creative process. So thanks for being here, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. What's your background with music? How did you get involved in the musical worlds?
Well, I grew up in a family of 10 siblings. Mom and dad had 10 kids, and my dad played jazz piano. He was one of these kind of, I guess he was a prodigy in a sense that he didn't read music. He didn't study music. He just started playing piano and just kind of taught himself and became quite a fabulous by-ear player, jazz pianist who played with people like Tony Bennett when he came through town back in the day. And he was the house piano player at this place called the Club 86, which is still there, believe it or not, in Geneva, New York, my hometown, which is where I'm staying right now. And so Dad, there was two pianos in the house and an organ, and everybody had to learn piano growing up. And I kind of went into it with interest, but then I after a while, I just started realizing that, it was too much like studying. It was too much like math to me. It was too analytical. And I wanted to be like my dad. I would listen to him. I'd actually sneak under the piano, and he wouldn't even know I'm there, and just listen to him play and just lay there and just absorb what he was doing. And I don't know, man, I just felt like I wanted to do that. But I couldn't. I didn't have that technique, and I really didn't put a lot of time into it. But so over time, I started just kind of making things up on the piano, and a lot of it sounded strange and avant-garde. And my mom finally said, "Look, you don't have to take lessons anymore if you don't want to." So that was like my way out. But I wasn't done with music, so I decided I was going to take up the trumpet.
Okay.
Which was a louder sound, and I could play over everybody else, So I was like, get me one of those. So actually ended up getting a flugelhorn. We had some trumpets in the house, I don't know where they came from, but, and I always felt like I was blowing into some antique thing that was valves were always sticking, and the mouthpiece wasn't really, something I would pick out myself. So finally, I actually got a decent instrument, probably $200-300 flugelhorn. And took lessons and stayed with it for a while. And then I went to college and dropped it all completely. I played a little bit of horn in college, but not much. I never played in bands or anything like that. But then I walked into a club when I visited in Boston, and I saw a guy named Mike Matheny, Pat Metheny's brother. I don't know if you know who Pat is.
Yep.
And he was playing something called an electronic valve instrument, which is this kind of strange MIDI wind synthesizer. Have you seen this? Have you?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you can play any sound, basses, or even like drums. So I could play. I mean, back in the day, I didn't have MIDI, so it was all just based on analog synthesis. But now I've got a looper and MIDI with this thing, so I can actually create just about anything I want on the spot, and then sing along with it, do spoken word, play along with it with a Hang, whatever, keyboards, whatever So, but back in the day, I didn't know what this was, but I fell in love with it. And Mike told me that they didn't make these anymore, and his brother Pat got it for him down in Sam Ash Music in New York City. So I called the place, and they said, they don't really make them anymore, but if one comes back, they'll get a hold of me. So lo and behold, they called me a few months later, and one had come back, and for several $100s, I was able to obtain an early version of the EVI, and electronic valve instrument, and I didn't know how to use it. There was really nobody out there to teach me, so I just kind of figured it out over time. And then the company Akai maybe I'm giving you too much information.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay. The company Akai Corporation decided that they were going to try to produce it and distribute it.
Yeah.
And so they bought the rights from the original maker named Niall Steiner. And they hired me to be their demo guy.
That's amazing.
Myself and Michael Brecker. I don't know if you know who he is or was. He passed away. But you know, and maybe 2 or 3 other guys were flying around the country and demonstrating
Wow.
the electronic valve instrument.
What
So
an
that was my
interesting
first
gig.
professional gig, you know, in the mid
Wow.
80s. And then I, you know, decided to move to California. My sister passed away, and it was kind of a big, kind of devastating time for that for me. And something came to me, and it was, I felt like her spirit was coming to me and saying, "Man, just do music. Just forget about everything else in your life, and just follow your bliss. Do your music." So I moved to California, and I started my band, the Venusians, and I was the leader of the band with the electronic valve instrument as a vocalist. And the band went through a lot of incarnations, but in over years of playing on big festival stages and doing cool gigs like at Burning Man, and you know, actually doing underground shows in San Francisco and way above ground shows like for Google and Microsoft and Apple, and
Mhm.
you know, because we were right there in the when the .com boom was happening. So they
Right.
were hiring us because we had all these cool instruments. We had, like,
Yes.
you know, early sequencers on stage. We were probably one of the first bands to play with sequencers. So it was just kind of like electro pop world band.
Wow.
And so we were riding high on that. But over time, I was starting to just feel like I wanted something else in my life that was acoustic, and I wasn't being called back to the trumpet and the piano. And so somebody told me they'd seen the Hung, or an early version of it, at Burning Man.
Hmm.
And I think you probably may have seen, or a lot of people saw this video of this guy kind of banging it on the ground and doing all kinds of
Yes.
spinning it and doing all
Yeah.
kinds of crazy stuff from Burning Man. And I, you know, I didn't know anything about it. I just thought, geez, what is that thing? You know, I want one of those. So, you know, and my friend helped me track down at least the name of the instrument. And, you know, the word came back, oh, they're not making them really, and they're not for, and I was, you know, kind of the same thing with the EVI. But I was persistent, and I joined a Yahoo users group of Hung players, which was like 30 people large at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. I
And
forgot about
did you
Yahoo
hear about that? The Yahoo
groups.
group?
Yeah. Yeah. That,
It dissipated really quick
of
after
course.
other forums started to happen. But
Yeah.
so I was, you know, somebody wanted to sell one on that users group. I think they were based in the Northwest or something.
Okay.
And I bought it for like $400,
Yeah.
which I think was the going rate for a Hung back
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
And so I had a Hung, and then I found out how to order one, and I got Ron Kravitz who was
I know Ron.
distributing for, you
I
know
know.
Ron, yeah.
Yeah.
So he was distributing for Panart. So
Yeah.
I decided I needed to get one that was going to match this one. So I
Mhm.
asked them to make a particular kind of custom thing, and they sent me one. You know, they got me one. Eventually, Ron got me one anyway. And suddenly I had these two Hungs, and I created an album called The Dance of the Helix, and I sent it to Switzerland as a thank you. Hey, thanks for making these beautiful instruments. And Felix and Sabina wrote back saying, "Hey, we love your album. Come on, visit us sometime."
Mhm.
And that started the whole kind of yearly visits to Switzerland and bringing back another Hung, and
Wow.
that's how it all started.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Do you remember what the scale was of your first? Of course you do, I'm sure. But what was the first scale that you had, and then what was the second one that you?
The first one I had was a kind of an F Lydian.
Okay.
Yeah. And the second one was like a C major, you
Nice.
know, pentatonic.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's amazing the variety of scales that were being produced in the first generation
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
instruments.
I
Like
never knew such scales existed.
I didn't either. And
Yeah.
I think they did a pretty good job of matching the scale to the geometry of the instrument too. Even the stranger ones still had their own mystique to them. I wouldn't necessarily want to own all of the scales that they produced tonally, but I think even the strange ones are fantastic in their own way for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I found that, you know, I would bring back a Hung, and I would say to myself, you know, wow, what could I do with this? I mean, there's like
Right.
7 possibilities or something like that. I just kind of came into it with a linear frame of mind, you
Mm,
know, like, but over time I realized, boy, there's a lot you can do with just one instrument. You know,
absolutely.
variations of scales you didn't think were there.
Yeah.
Like people who used to say to me, you know, what kind of scale was it? And I thought more like, well, you know, okay, so there's a scale that you can play, you know, up and
Yeah.
down, but then you could do, you know, and again, I approached it from a non-musician's frame
Yes.
just because I wasn't really a accomplished musician. I was well, I shouldn't say that. I'm an accomplished musician, but not a theory person.
Yes, of
So I
course.
was more of an ear guy. So
Yep.
I kind of approached it that way. So I didn't analyze the notes. In fact, I couldn't even tell you what the notes are. I guess I maybe could on the two hungs that I have
Yeah.
now, but um,
I like
yeah.
that approach though, because that's my background as well. Too. My first sort of venture into music was guitar, but my background was never in percussion. I got really interested in world music, and then I discovered the hong a long time ago, and it wasn't until I don't even remember how many years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, that I had a chance to actually play one. Um,
Hmm.
and it kind of
Yeah.
all spiraled from there. But I like.
I love your playing, by the way.
Thank
I've
you. I
been watching
appreciate
you
that.
on Instagram, and it's like, damn, you know, you got a really great feel, and it's
Thank you.
yeah, I really have an appreciation for that. And you seem to have like, I don't know where you get all these instruments. I mean, are you kind of distributing them, or how's that
No,
work?
I'm kind of in a relationship with different makers, and
Uh huh.
they like my music, and then I make them content and play on their instruments.
Oh, that's great.
It's been fun. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's amazing to me how much things have changed and evolved with that shape of an instrument. Um,
Hmm.
Even just changes in steels, changes in geometry. But I think the initial feeling and the initial timbre of the hong is so distinct, even now, among all of these instruments. It just has a very, very particular feel to
Yeah.
it. Um,
Yeah. I noticed that there's in the earlier versions, especially, that there was this kind of like almost haunting, kind of almost a
yes.
cry, you know, like a
Yeah.
resonance that had this. Yeah, you're right, a very distinctive kind of resonance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Between the different generations, which one would you say calls to you the most?
Yeah, I get this question sometimes, and I would say definitely the free integral hung, just because
Mm,
there's many more. I don't know. It just seems like there's. I wouldn't say more variations,
mm,
because I noticed that with the second generation hung that I have, I can also explore in many different variations and create different timbres and different scale options and possibilities. But there's something about the sound and resonance of the free integral hung that really hits me in a way that it brings a certain kind of depth into my soul that I really enjoy
I could
playing
say,
with and listening to. And a lot of people tell me the same thing. Some
yeah,
people do say I like the second gen better. It just depends on the person, I think. So
100%. I agree. It is interesting how, again, how distinct that particular generation is. Because I have an integral hung, so right before they started to produce that. This one was from 2009, I think. Um,
uh-huh.
but it's even between that year and the year after that, when they started to produce the free integral hung.
Right.
What a different sound. I know the tuning
Yeah.
process is a little bit different too, because they weren't
Yeah,
using
yeah.
strobe
Well, the
tuning.
free hung was also, I mean, the integral hung is tuned to like within 440
Yep.
parameters, right? So
Yep.
the free hung was more, we're going to start with one kind of note and then work around that by ear, as opposed to, you know, tuning it all with a tuner.
And I kind of like that process. I had a conversation last week with a handpan maker, Luna handpans, and he was talking a lot about the difference between the tuning style of sort of forcing the steel to be a certain note.
Hmm.
You could tune a note. You have a variety of pitches you could tune it to, but there's particular pitches that particular steel, that particular instrument and geometry wants to go to. And
Hmm.
it's the same way I approach flute making or instrument making in general. There sometimes you go, even though the parameters are all correct, the measurements are correct, the hole size is there, it just doesn't want to do that thing.
Yeah.
So I like the concept of the free integral hum, because it seems more like they were moving in the direction that the instrument and themselves wanted to move in that moment.
Yeah, you know, I guess there's one way is I mean, to use the painting by numbers analogy. You know, it's like you just kind of lose that and you just create something that's wholly new. And suppose there's a certain amount of excitement that goes into that may, you know, be more tedious if you're just doing it by watching a tuner or listening to a
Yeah.
tuning fork or however you're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
In your trips there, which of the newer instruments, I saw a video a little while ago where you kind of went through some of the newer creations that you've picked up from them. Which of those, what are the differences between those, and which of those do you feel most connected to, aside from the gooball? I know you like the gooball a lot.
Well, yeah, the gooball is, I love the gooball. I mean, I love them all, but the
Yeah.
gooball has got its, you know, it's got a certain character. It's almost like it's a blend of a lot of things, but you know, it has some of that earlier generation vibe to it. But the fact that you can, you know, play all the bass stuff, and I love the sound of the ring ding, I guess it's called. Not, you know, the goo is no longer, but it's the ring ding. So that has this kind of raspy. It's that same kind of raspiness that I loved about the earlier hungs that had that, you know, just a characteristic sound. But you know, the Godo is really cool. You know, I'm not a percussionist, so, you know, let me just be clear about that. I don't, I don't have a skillful. I mean, I learned some percussion techniques just from playing the hung. I didn't like study percussion, but you know, I guess I applied some piano rhythm or whatever, just rhythm in general from playing the hung. But I'm not a percussionist, but I do love the Godo and the Gudu, and the Gedi, the little one.
Yeah.
It's so much fun because you can just carry it around with you. So
Yeah,
I'm like just kind of developing my own little percussive techniques that are elementary, but I really do love it, and I love that you can get like a 7-tone bass sound out of this little thing. You know, it's really amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that takes a little doing, but I really had a good time. So those are great. And then of course, the hung ball is a little bit more like the goo ball, and kind of a combination of the goo ball and the integral, I guess you might say.
Yeah.
But the power of these instruments, you know, unless you're, you know, multi-tracking, the power of these instruments is really in playing in groups.
Right.
And I think that's what Panart had in mind when they were making these, is to create instruments that people can play together with. You know, one thing holds down the bass, another thing is more melodic, you know, so it goes in that direction. And so, you know, I like them all. Again, I guess if I'd say I had a desert island instrument, it'd probably be the free integral hung.
Yeah.
But, you know, I try to spread out my time with these things. But those other instruments, the newer instruments, I use more for recording.
Okay.
And I did some a meditation type of CD. The Sanctuary at Sedona is out in Sedona, Arizona, and they hired me to do these guided meditations. So I would record their meditation and then do music around them. But it's not like a meditation like you would think. I mean, it's more tribal sometimes, you know, and more rhythmic. And so it was up to me to kind of bring these elements in depending on what the content was. So I used a lot of the newer instruments for that purpose, and it came out really well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
They definitely have, I feel like the intended approach for playing has changed. I remember in the early days, it was very clear that they were not a drum. They were not to be played as a drum per se. But I feel like they've embraced the percussive element a little bit more in the last 5 or 6 years, because the gooball has a percussive aspect to it, especially with that, the center note. And I think it's interesting to watch their progression and what they're hoping to pull from that steel. It's definitely changed, it seems, over
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think anybody who is an artist realizes that things, ideas change over time. I mean, I saw what their concepts were. I know that it was met with a lot of controversy in terms of, people wanted to call it a drum. And when I first got my first instrument, I was of the mindset of, wow, this is not a drum. It's not a piano. It's not a marimba. It's new. It's new. So why even put a tag on it? So I kind of understood that. And I also realized that, playing it harsh or playing it with a lot of force will take away some of the beauty of what the instrument has to offer. The nuance that the instruments have, especially the later instruments, are and I'm not just, this is not just Panart instruments too. I think a lot
Of
of
course.
the whole hand pan, all of these have a nuance to them that if
Yep.
you lose that, if you play it fast and furious and with, like I have done many
Of course, yeah.
times,
That's kind of the
you know,
beginning of every player, is to play as hard and as fast as you
yeah,
possibly
it's like how, but then you hear that sound that sounds like
Yes.
it's just like, oh God, there's
Yes.
that horrible sound again that I created.
Yep.
And you try to learn to just kind of like rein it back in again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It
So,
it definitely is a mindfulness training, because I think
yeah.
when we approach anything, whether it's guitar or whatever instrument, dynamics are always a tricky thing, especially when
Mhm.
you're first approaching it, because you want to go into it with all of your intention and all of your heart, and that often manifests, at least for me, as playing it too hard or playing it too quickly. So it's a good
Mhm.
practice to learn to pull back from that and kind of
Yeah.
listen a little
Yeah.
bit more. And
Yeah. I
I
still
think,
get tempted to play fast, just
yeah, which is okay. There's nothing
it's an
wrong with
energy thing. But if the trick for me is to play, if I want to play fast, but don't play with force,
it.
like
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
almost like a little dance, a finger
Yeah.
dance or something. But I watch some of these people, hung players or handpan or whatever that they're playing. I'm like, holy, these guys are like amazing. I mean,
Right.
some of the, like yourself, for instance, I mean, I think there's just some really some very sensitive players out there who are really experimenting with amazing timbres and
Yeah.
rhythms and things that are off the grid. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah, yeah,
And it's interesting to see the shift with people. I think the Hong seem to attract, maybe I'm wrong in this assumption, but maybe a 50-50 split of drummers and people who are just very connected to that sound, versus the handpan. Now I feel like 70 or 80% of the players have some sort of percussion background, but I'm seeing it shift a little bit more to the other side, so closer to 50-50.
yeah,
I think there's obviously room for all styles of playing, because that's kind of the purpose of these instruments, is individual expression. But from listening to your music to listening to other people's music, the approach that I think appeals most to me, and I think to an audience that's outside of this community, the Hong, handpan, you know, is that style that has a little bit more chordal movement and melodic movement, and not just full on drum based playing all the time.
hmm
What that's what I'm attracted to, at least, and that's kind of
yeah,
my goal in my playing, is to not, the rhythm is always going to be a part of whatever you do, whether you're walking or whether you're gardening or playing a handpan or a hong.
hmm
But I think there's players who are looking to evoke emotion through movement melodically, and there's players who are looking to evoke emotion solely through rhythm, with the melody as a background to the rhythm.
hmm
So it's kind of cool to see the two different camps approach the instrument in such
yeah,
drastically
yeah.
different ways.
And I use my. I mean, I've certainly done my share of solo hung music and
Yeah.
other instruments that I have, of those melodic steel instruments, but the the electronic valve instrument,
Yeah.
and keyboards and all these things are kind of they're a major part of my music too. So I tend to use the hung as a tool, and I also use it for my own sanity because
That's
it's the
fair.
one instrument that I could sit with and just kind of feel free with. And
Yeah.
I mean, I can do that with anything too, but there's just something about the connection with that instrument, that visceral
Yeah.
connection. And now with COVID and getting kicked off the road
Right.
mid tour,
Right.
I'm finding myself back to my earlier days when I first discovered the hung, to go out into nature. I
Mhm.
mean, back in the early days, I would go out into Golden Gate Park and just play, and I wasn't panhandling. I was just playing for the fun of playing, and people would come by and, wow, what is that? And I'm just finding myself now kind of back into connecting with people out in nature areas, and yeah, it's great. It's in some ways. I mean, I'm looking at the light at the end of or
Yep.
the tunnel or something, like the silver cloud of all this thing. It's brought me back to my family, back to New York from the West Coast, and it's bringing me back to some of the basic stuff that I had early on that I've kind of lost in a sense.
I
Yeah.
think when you're really focused on performing places and playing, you lose some of that creative time. I notice in spaces where I'm very occupied and sort of single-mindedly doing things, you miss that creative process, especially taking it to places like a forest, or it's hard to have that higher level of creativity if you're always performing or producing constantly. You don't have that. You kind of need that alone time to have the creative spark to actually produce things. And I think, like you said, that's, in a sort of convoluted way, is the beauty of this whole staying home and kind of bringing yourself back to your own place of living and your own time, because it's making people evaluate, if they're musicians, their approach to their instrument, because they're kind of developing hopefully more inner understanding of how they're approaching things, because it's more for them. You're not doing it necessarily for an audience, or for it's creating a different sort of view of individuals' performances and instruments. So there is a good aspect to all of this, for sure.
Well said. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I love performing. I love even being on tour. It's exciting. It's great to go into new places. It's tedious too at times, because I'm never in one place long enough, unless I rent a place out in Florida for a couple of months and use Florida as kind of a touring hub. But and then the artisan residencies, which were great. You know, that's always wonderful, because I can be in one place, and my job is just to go out into nature and play. So
that sounds fantastic.
Do
you have any of your instruments with you?
This light is bugging me. I thought I might need it. Oh, maybe I do need it. Yeah, it's kind of dark now. It's getting cold out here. Back in New York State again.
It's been
a summer, you know. So now we're dealing with. I'm seeing the fall coming, or the fall's here, but I'm seeing the winter coming. I'm going, yeah, ready or not.
I know. I feel like this year time has been very skewed. You know, I find myself shocked that it's already, the leaves are already turning and falling. It's been a quick year in some ways, for sure.
This will probably be my first full-on winter back here for decades.
Interesting.
I mean, I've been coming back more and more and spending more time on the East Coast and the West, and I spend, maybe December, and then I'm off January, February down south playing. But I think this year I'll probably be here for most of the time.
Well, it's nice to return home and have sort of your own time to create. Maybe more music will come from your time spent there.
I hope so.
I bet it will.
Yeah.
Do you have any of your instruments nearby you? I'd love to hear one of the newer instruments, if you have anything.
Yeah, I mean, they're all around. Zoom.
Zoom is not the best for audio
quality.
Sounds
so bad. Sure. I mean, with that in mind, I mean, I could just give you a quick.
Or maybe just show it and talk a little bit about it. Aha.
Yeah, again, it's not going to sound great, but
that's okay. Obviously, this will not be an accurate representation, but
this is Godot, which the Godot could be played, just straight up, or you can, I think the best way to play it is kind of the vertical position.
Interesting.
Now, if you probably can't hear the bass, but it's going boom.
A little bit, but not quite as strong as I'm sure you can.
Well, and it's
is the center notes tuned, or like the ding section?
I think
it must be, yeah. Interesting. It's kind of like a mono handpan with a bass elements to it. I like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Nagiti is this cute little thing here that you won't be able to hear the bass again.
Yeah, of course.
and then there's
Interesting.
of course the.
Reminds me of my house with all of my instruments.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Oh. The Gudu. You see
Yeah,
the Gudu?
that's a very different sound, actually. Interesting.
Yeah, so the bass is. Yeah.
Those are fantastic.
Yeah. And then
How do you see them being applied outside of playing with other music, other instruments of that style? Have you seen them being played with a guitar or in other sort of musical situations
I've
too?
done that with my band. I mean,
Yeah.
we did a series of gigs at we did a series of gigs at Google
Mhm.
headquarters, and they wanted us to do just kind of like instrumental acoustic thing. So I brought the Balu and the Gudu and the Getty and all these things out, and my band, they're all actually great percussionists.
Mhm.
I mean, two of the guys in the band who played with me, one is actually a drummer, and well, they're both amazing drummers, and I'm like I'm the least drummer of all of them. But
Melodic
but
drummer.
we but we just got these things rolling, man. It was amazing. And so Daniel also picked up the ukulele or the kora and played along with that, and the other guy also was playing his kit too. So yeah, it was furious. It was great. People really enjoyed it.
I really
Uh,
I like the way that these instruments, tongue drums as well too, they kind of they fit well into so many different musical situations, whether it's guitar or piano. They kind of just go with everything. I haven't really heard a
yeah,
combination that I've disliked, one
yeah, yeah.
paired with the string instrument or another
Sure,
wind
sure.
instrument.
Yeah, yeah. They're pretty fascinating. I mean, they're always in the, I guess, the process of research and development over there. But
Right.
yeah, and you've seen the Balu, right? The hung Balu.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the. I mean, I can bring it out if you want, but again, it's gonna.
Yeah, it won't
That's
do
the.
justice to it.
That's the more hung-like of all of them,
Yep.
and but the God, I did. Somebody wanted me to do like a meditation or something on Zoom, and then they sent it back to me, and I was like, I wanted to bury my head in the
Oh
sand.
no.
It sounded so bad. I mean, I thought Facebook Live sounded bad for me, but when
Yeah.
I heard Zoom, I was like, oh man. So that's why I'm a little bit. I think the EVI is probably. I mean, this cuts through in a different way,
Yeah,
and
it
plus
sounds
it's
fantastic when
direct.
you were playing it
Yeah,
before.
it's
Feel
going
free to play
direct into.
something if you want
What's
to.
that?
Feel free to play on it if you'd love to demonstrate.
Oh well,
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you want to hear something?
Yes, please.
Um,
Not to put you on the spot. But...
how's it sound? Is it cracking?
Nope.
So I've got a looper here. I can. Well, I probably won't play bass because it won't come through there, but
Right.
trying to think of. Okay, here we go. All right, so there's a little example of
That's amazing.
EI looping. I mean, there's it's pretty cool with the breath expression that you can pretty much play any kind of sound with a.
So is it pressure sensitive in the same way that a flute, you could pitch bend a flute if you were to
Yeah, I
blow
mean, it's
slightly harder?
velocity, the breath, the
Okay.
breath, what is creating the velocity, sensitivity, and
What an interesting
pretty
example.
amazing instrument. And it's got, you can play chords with it. You can, you have an 8-octave range, and
Wow.
there's the thing called the special button, which allows you to do all kinds of fun stuff. And this, and I changed my sounds with this little. There's a little it's so rudimentary looking, but it's like a little screw. All these things are like little screw heads,
Mhm.
and when I want to change like to my basses, I'll go to the lowest B, which on the trumpet is the middle valve, and I go to the lowest octave, and I have a fretless bass, and another bass on the next octave up, and so on. So I got all my sounds in my head programmed to correspond to different octaves and different notes.
Mhm.
And I can make the change immediately just by hitting that note and then hitting this little switch on the bottom.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, that is fantastic.
Kind of an ingenious little instrument
It
here.
really is. Is it self-contained, or does it have to be played through like a BA system?
Yeah, the earlier one, the first one that I had was self-contained. I mean,
Mm.
it came with a little tiny suitcase, and it was connected to that.
Oh
And
wow.
it was this little analog synthesizer that you can just, had all these knobs on it. Really cool. But this one's a MIDI instrument, so I've got it MIDI'd into a Roland module that has, I don't know, like all kinds of different options and possibilities. And then I have to shape it to work with the breath sensitivity. So it's a lot of analytical work, that I don't
Yep.
really love doing.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, I'd rather just sit in the park and play the hung all day.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
When you go to write a song, what is your approach for it? Is it kind of spontaneous, or do you have obviously when you play the hong for long enough, you kind of have those sounds in your head already, so you know where they all are, so you can access them differently than somebody who would be picking it up for the first time. But for you, is it a spontaneous creation and then you kind of capture that and are able to repeat it, or is it more planned out for you?
It really depends. I mean, if I'm inspired by something, either by something that comes to me in terms of a lyric or an event, good or bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote an entire concert worth of material that was inspired in kind of a difficult way through going through difficult times, and heartbreak and loss of my wife and all that kind of stuff. So, and then I would bring in, I'd be like, okay, I've kind of gone through that. Now I like to bring a little bit more fun and goofy elements into it. So I'd write songs about shit that happens to me on the road,
Hmm.
So I call them songs from the heart of the road and the rhythm of life. So it's kind of a blend of different things that have inspired me or have been difficult passages in my life, and or just things that happen on the road, how does the whole process happen? I don't, if I'm writing lyrics, that's a process in and of itself.
Hmm.
And that is extremely time consuming and extremely tedious for me. But I probably spend just as much time writing lyrics as I do playing my instrument.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that approach too. I can tell there are some people that are kind of spontaneous lyric writers, and it kind of just happens at the same time as the song is forming. But your lyrics definitely seem very poignant and purposeful. So I appreciate the time.
Yeah, maybe too much. Sometimes I could just be like, it's dating myself here, but like Steely Dan and
Yep.
have write songs that you don't even know what they're talking about. You
Right.
have no idea,
Yep.
but they're great, and you
Right.
know all the words. But it's like, did I ever stop and wonder what does that mean, or what
Yeah.
is he talking about, or what is he singing?
Yep.
And
Kind
then
of
a lot of great songs, you don't even know what they're singing,
of
And I'm
course.
always thinking like, no, they must understand the content because it's important for them to understand. It's like,
Well, it's kind of
okay.
like Dylan's argument when, in the old interviews, people would be like, "Oh, what does this song mean?" He's like, "I don't know. What does it mean to you?" It's like, "I don't,
Yeah,
I don't know. I
well,
just wrote it." You know?
yeah, well, if somebody asked me that question, I pretty much answered the same way. I'm like, well, I don't know. How did you feel about it? What did
Yeah,
you,
I like, I like
that's
that though. That's a good reflection. I think throwing it back on the listener is important, because I think you might be trying to say something, but depending on the listener's mood or their previous experiences or whatever, they're going to take something different from what you're
sure.
doing, even if
Yeah,
you have a different intention.
yeah.
Yeah,
I've
I like.
noticed that you're doing. I've seen your Instagram, and you're doing some lyrical songs too.
Yeah, my background, like I was saying, is in guitar. So I have a whole canon of things that I've written on there. So when I'm approaching these instruments, I'm thinking of them as a songwriter and not really
Hmm.
as a percussionist. Maybe
Hmm.
similar to how you're thinking about it. It's planful in that I'm not thinking about what dyad goes with this dyad or what note is this. I know the notes on most of the instruments, but music theory is not my thing. I'm more, I'm a listener and I'm a reproducer by listening. And
Hmm.
I like to get to know the instruments and then try to say something on them, kind of like I would say on guitar or on other string instruments, because I think there's a lot available on the hong or on a handpan for melodic expression. So
Hmm.
the possibilities are very, very broad, even though it's a
Yeah,
limited set of notes. It's
sure.
it pulls different things out of everybody who approaches it.
Hmm.
And I think that's the curious thing about hearing so many players. The handpan world has exploded. The tongue drum world has exploded in popularity. But even though there's thousands and thousands and thousands of players playing on a B minor scale or a integral scale or whatever it happens to be, there's still nuance and variation in all of those players, even though they're still limited to the 8 or 9 notes or 7 notes that they
Hmm.
have on their instrument. So it's a
Yeah, I think that's the brilliance of what what these instruments have to offer is that it's a very simple, kind of approach to music, but
yep,
yet you have to explore, you have to dig deep in order to
yep,
make it interesting and make it so that it can be expansive and not just repetitive or maybe repetitive is good too if you're trying to
maybe,
create some kind of a meditative vibe.
yep,
Heck, man, some of the most amazing tunes out there in the whole world of kind of meditation, like El Hadra, have you ever heard that? Or
yep, oh
some
yeah,
of these, some of these journey, these shamanic journey vibes. It's like the same thing over and
hmm,
over, and it really can hit you after a while. I guess it just depends on a lot of factors, but yeah,
no, I agree. I'm glad to see more people approaching it in a more of a creative way than just thinking, oh, this is something to slam around on. There's so much more to these instruments than just that one
yeah.
aspect of them. For you, when you started to travel to Switzerland, what was that first experience of going to the hong house like for you,
Oh,
visiting
just
Panart for the
pure
first time?
pure magic. I
I'm
mean,
sure, yeah.
it was amazing. I mean, it's a hang. It's
Yeah,
a social environment, and it's a great hang. And I remember early on, I was there with my recorder because I wanted to pick up on some of the stuff that was going on there, and I actually created a little CD based on with along with some original music and the sounds of what was going on there and conversations between people. And
yeah.
I mean, I think I heard that like 20,000 or more instruments have been sold since the beginning of Panarts days. And if you count the visitations and the people who came with the people who were getting their instrument, a lot of people come in and out of that place.
Hmm.
And so when I go there, I try to just I just meet people from all around the world, and it was an amazing. I mean, like a lot of languages I didn't speak,
Hmm.
so there was always somebody there to be able to interpret something. Felix and Sabina both speak like 6 languages
I'm not
fluently. So
surprised. I'm not surprised.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was magic, and just getting there, flying into Zurich, and taking the train, and then getting a little you know hostel or Airbnb or something
Hmm.
nearby, and then walking through the streets of Bern and down this little staircase in nature, and then being on the RA River and walking up the river, and then there's the Hung House, and yeah, it's really an amazing place, and they're very graciously accept they're very great with company. They really
Hmm.
want to bring you, make sure that you have some coffee or a glass of wine or
Hmm.
whatever it is that you need or want, and
Yeah,
it's great. It's exploring something new. So I have nothing but great memories there.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
It seems very community based. I feel like the initial influx of Hong players, I think, seem to think of the instrument in a different way than it's perceived now. And I don't know if it's just because they were there during the initial spark, and it was, it still does have that magic, but I feel like 10, 12 years ago, it was so new to people and so new to the internet even as well. So it's amazing to see that even though there's a lot more availability of similar instruments, there's still that intense desire to play them and to see them and to hear them,
Yeah, I'm not aware of that so much because I'm kind of insular in a sense.
Yeah.
I'm on my own. I haven't been to a gathering. I haven't played. I certainly know people and I have good friends who are, kind of more involved with the whole, exterior handpan world.
Yeah.
And some of them, he've even had me play at their places, and I'm good friends with some of the makers and all that. But I'm not that familiar with the people or the desire around the hung anymore, or if that even exists, because there's such a bloom of other instruments out there. But
Yeah.
I never wanted to exploit it. I mean, I had some instruments early on. When I had 3 or 4 hung, I gave a couple of them back as gifts. I just, I've got plenty now, So, but I had 3 or 4 hungs in a circle, and I would play them, and I realized that early on that I was starting to use my analytical mind too much. I had to have them set up in a certain position, and then I'd have to remember, kind of. It was more like playing the piano in a sense.
Yeah.
And so I kind of realized that, I'm approaching this in a way that it doesn't really resonate with the way that I felt the initial spark of the hung. So I got rid of what I didn't need, and I kept what I have, and just play with 1 hung now, because it's not that I wouldn't play with 2. I just don't have 2 that work together.
Of course. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I used to, but and I didn't want to. Early on, I put some videos out there and I took them offline because I was surrounded by all these hungs and people really wanted a hung, so I just felt weird, like I'm some kind of a hung hog or something. So I just kind of I took those videos offline, and I just realized, you know what, I like just playing one and singing along with it or not, and just, kind of go in that direction. Although if I end up with another one someday that does work with what I have, it wouldn't be beyond me to play 2 at a time again.
Right.
I don't even know how that part of the conversation came up, but
no, I appreciate that it did. I think that's kind of, there's also 2 camps in the handpan, probably the hung world too, where it's people really believe in the simplicity of playing and that we should have 7 or 8 or 9 notes, and that is the purest form of these instruments. And then there's the other camp that's very much about adding as many notes as possible. Like the instrument there has 18 notes. So it's not.
What's the difference? I've never played one. I've never been around one. I've only seen it online. Is there a difference in the timbre and the resonance, the sound quality when you have more notes?
So I think there's always a trade-off. Depending on the maker, it's a minor trade-off or it could be a major trade-off. There's notes, like the smaller notes tuned into it, they're not tuned with an octave and a compound fifth. They're tuned usually just with one other note, so usually just the octave. So like these little guys right there. So they have a different sound to them. I'd say the higher notes tuned like that sound more akin to a steel pan. They have that sort of timbre to them. But if it's a good maker who has good control over the steel, they can sound pretty clean, but they also can sound very messy. So it really depends on the scale and where the maker's at in their own creation. But
yeah,
it's a sacrifice though, because the approach for this is completely different than playing on my integral hum. Like I'm not even thinking the same way.
Right.
But
are you playing it vertically? Is that how you're doing it?
Yeah. So I'm thinking about it in the sense that I'm keeping one hand devoted to maybe a rhythm on the right side and then filling in with the left side a melody on top of that. So it opens up a lot of possibilities. I'm not a big stand player either. A lot of people who play bottom note instruments like stands, but I like to have it on my lap when I'm playing it. But that's it's a personal aesthetic sort of.
I'm a lap guy too, and
yeah.
I
I
feel
think
like there's a better connection with me, the instrument. And then also there's something that I notice is when the instrument starts to slide off of my lap a little bit,
yeah,
and I have to actually stop and grab it and just push it up a little bit,
yeah,
that becomes part of the performance. Because all of
yes,
a sudden I'll hit, like when I'm grabbing it, bringing up, I'll hit a tone that I normally wouldn't hit, and I'm like,
yeah.
wow, that sounded pretty
That
cool.
works. Yeah, I like that.
So that's kind of like part of the whole shtick, you know. It's like
Yeah.
just every so often, just a little jink, you know, you know.
Hmm.
So yeah, but you know, people like stands. Use a stand.
Yeah, and I get it. I guess if you were in a particular context, it would make sense to
Yeah,
do that.
I mean, I used stands early on because I was playing more than one
Yeah,
instrument.
if you
So
have three or four, then you either need pillows or stands to do it with. But
yeah,
there,
stand.
there's
You know, yeah.
there's some instruments too, I think, that sound better on stands, almost as if they're designed just because of their transfer of energy. They sound a little
Uh-huh.
bit more crisp on a
Yeah,
stand versus on your lap. But
yeah,
yeah, for me, I definitely think
yeah.
lap playing is the ideal
Uh-huh.
situation.
Yeah. And notice it's getting dark here. Is it too? Let me see if I raise this shade up here. Does
No,
that
you're
do
fine.
anything? Oh, a little bit.
No,
Um,
I like
yeah,
the
we're getting a little
helix.
dark here on the canal. I'm on the Seneca Cayuga Canal, which is I wonder if you could see that if I turn my computer around. Oh, got a little dark out there.
Oh wow, it's a beautiful spot.
Yeah, yeah. There's some boats over there in a little harbor. But this canal
Wow.
goes up to Seneca Lake, which is the deepest. And, I think it's probably the longest of the Finger Lakes. Have you heard of the Finger Lakes?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like 600 feet deep and about 38 miles long.
Wow.
About a mile. It's a big lake for around here. And then with this canal, you know, you can actually get to the Hudson River or to the St. Lawrence Seaway and get out to New York City or to anywhere. It'll take you a long time, but it's, you know, New York's like 320 miles from here in New York City.
New York's a fantastic state too. I hadn't spent, I played at a show in upstate New York a couple of years ago, but after that particular show, I went and tried to explore as many of the waterfalls as I could in that area, and just, it's fantastic
Yeah. Have you
what's
seen
available
Taganek
there.
Falls? Did you get to Taganek, the big
No,
one?
we went to Catterskill, is it Moneybrook Falls. A lot of them were very different than Massachusetts waterfalls too, just in the way that they eroded the rock face. And there's a lot of waterfalls that have a slate bottom
Right,
or an old mud bottom, so there's
right.
fossils at the bottom of them. It was fantastic,
The
fantastic.
Taganek Falls is higher than Niagara Falls. It's actually the highest falls east of the Rocky Mountains.
Really?
And it's a short drive from where I'm living right now. I did a whole video, a 1 minute video on Instagram, and I put some original music on it and
I'll have to look.
and showed three different flows
Wow.
of the waterfall, and it's pretty cool. If you get a chance, check it out.
Yeah,
It's on my
definitely.
Instagram. It's just, I think it's just called Taganek Falls, but yeah, I love this area. I really can't believe that I've been away for so long, and
Yeah.
I always thought California, you can't beat it in terms of the natural environment. And there are some things there that you just, you know, I mean, how are you going to replace a redwood forest or
Right.
a coastal, you know, Route 1 on the coast and places like in the desert? I love the desert,
Hmm.
but there's just something right about this area that's so old and weathered in such a beautiful way. And yeah, I'm just exploring it in a whole new, in my older age right now. Really enjoying it. Yeah.
I feel like upstate New York feels like an extension. It has the same feeling to me as Western Mass has. Once you get past
Yeah.
middle Massachusetts, something changes. And I don't know if
Well,
it's just,
Western Mass is amazing,
I
and
love Western Mass. Yeah.
back in the day when I was a hitchhiker, I was in Albany.
Hmm.
A friend of mine dropped me off there. I was visiting him in Albany. I needed to get to Boston, so I was going to hitchhike to Boston. So um, uh, he dropped me off at a 76 station. I started talking to these truckers. I'm like, "Hey man, can you give me a ride? You know, where are you going? Where are you going?" So one guy had a car carrier, you know, one of these big
Yep.
trucks that carry cars, and I said, "Hey man, can you give me a ride?" He goes, "It's against the rules to have you in the cab with me, but there's nothing in the rule book that says you can't be up there." I go, "You gotta be
Oh
kidding
my
me!
God.
You're gonna let me get up in the car?" I go, "Which one?" He goes, "Get in the front one. I don't care." So I drove through the Berkshire Mountains on top of a
Oh
car
my
carrier.
God.
It was so awesome.
That's amazing.
It was
That's
it was
crazy.
like I mean, it was a view that you really, you know, you can't
Yeah.
imagine being up that high, but
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Yeah, there's so much that's the kind of the beautiful thing about the US too, is the environment is so diverse depending on where you are. You know, California
Yeah,
feels completely different from the East
yeah,
Coast, and Florida feels completely different from the North.
yeah, yeah. It really does. And then there's the Everglades, which is different from
Yes.
all of Florida.
Yeah.
It's got its own natural environment. And wow, the moon is coming up right now, and it's bright orange, and it's amazing. I don't know if you can see it from where you're at, but
I don't think I
it's
can.
pretty incredible.
I'm kind of out on a hill, so I'll have to look afterwards.
Yeah, you have to check this out. It's like a big harvest moon coming up.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic. I can't believe
Uh,
we're already this far into the season. Like I was saying, it's a
yeah.
crazy year, but I am glad for more time to create music and to, spend time.
Yeah, this is a crazy time, and it is I think an important time to kind of reflect on what's happening and maybe
Yes.
bring more goodness in the world in whatever way you can. And
Yeah.
I get you know uh, incensed with the political issues that are going on and the divisive issues. And
Mhm.
and I'm all over the place. I mean, I'm in southern Georgia. I'm in Louisiana. I'm in California. I'm in New York. I'm around all these places, and I see that there's just really good people out there, no matter
Of course.
what, and
Yep.
and we all kind of get intensely involved with what the media has to feed us or what these.
Yes.
And we have to be careful about losing our souls in that whole
I
world.
agree.
So,
That's kind of it's the Hegelian dialectic, divide people so that they're easier to conquer apart
yeah,
than together,
yeah, yeah,
But that's the beauty of the Hong. That's the beauty of handpans and music, is that you can disagree with another person. You could still appreciate the same music, or the same,
yeah,
that's,
yeah,
I like that interconnectedness,
yeah,
even in communities across the world.
yeah,
With the handpan community, there's a, whether it's guitar or whether it's mandolin, there's a connection wherever you are, if you meet a
hmm
fellow player, or someone who plays in the same vein as you. So
hmm
I
yeah,
appreciate that. It reminds us of our humanness, I think, when we were able
yeah.
to make musical connections.
Yes,
You know,
indeed. Yes,
but
indeed. Yeah.
so
Hey,
where
do you know what time it is?
it is 7:12.
Yeah, I probably have to wrap things up pretty soon. I'm supposed to. My brother, who lives next door, and another brother are all getting together and
Nice.
having dinner next door. So, I'm
Well,
very
where can
fortunate.
people find your music and get in touch with you? And what's your social media?
Yeah, I'm at Matt Venuti Music on Instagram and Facebook. Matt Venuti Music. And I'm at www.mattvenuti.com. Venuti is Venuti, and that's my website. And I love hearing from people. I like connecting with people. I was shy around that for quite a while, and now with everything that's changing, I'm realizing I have to up my social media presence.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah, so I'm kicking and screaming into that world,
Yep.
starting to respond to people because I was always like, oh God, this impersonal thing, I just
Mhm.
really couldn't wrap my mind around it. But I'm trying to do it and trying to realize the good in it. And so please, yeah, touch in, and private messages are always good because that way I definitely will, I mean, yeah. So it'd be great to connect with people.
Awesome. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much for chatting. It was interesting to hear about your
Rewild your soul. I like that. Yeah, I feel like I'm rewilding in a sense, back in the wilds of central New York,
Yeah.
and I appreciate what you put out there too, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Hope to talk to you soon.
All right. All the best.
Stay well.
Take care.